Well, good afternoon. How are you? That's nice. That's how my dad would greet everybody who he knew very well, every single time. He would cut you off just as you were about to answer, and he thought it was hilarious. He started this habit after he earnestly tried to answer someone who had casually asked him how he was, and just cut him off saying, "That's nice," and looked away. And he thought that was really funny, so he decided he would do that with everyone that he became comfortable with. Eventually, his personal greeting for me mutated to a play on words of my nickname, "How are you?" My name's Amy. And last night, as I was working on things, I finally, after 51-ish years, came up with an appropriate response that he would have loved, and I'm kicking myself that I came up with it too late. "I'm okay, go." So that's for you, Dad. I think you would like that. So thank you all so much for coming today, in person or online. And if you're connected to the internet via fiber optic cable, you can thank my dad in small part for that. He would want you to be watching, so he would say, "Oh, it's my pleasure." My name is Ayumi, and I'm the youngest of Keigo's daughters. He made no, he didn't hide the fact that he always wanted a boy. But instead he got 4 girls: Nozomi, Izumi, Megumi, and I'm Ayumi. My parents joked that if they tried one more time to have a boy and had another girl, they would name her Kurushimi, which translated means anguish or distress. Over time, he made it very clear to us that he was happy to have 4 girls. He grew up mostly around boys. He was the youngest of 3 sons, and then became a scientist, and so he was surrounded by more men. We taught him how to be around women, and he taught us that anything a boy can do, a girl can do too. Today we're here to celebrate his accomplished life and share stories about him to help ease our longing for him. He would be so honored to know that he touched so many lives. And I'd like to bring up his granddaughter Kiyomi to say a few words. You didn't get Iizuka height.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending today's service. My name is Kiyomi Kyle, and I am one of Keigo Iizuka's grandchildren. We refer to him as Gigi. There's no doubt Gigi would have been touched to see everyone gathering here today. He loved family gatherings and would often say a speech with tears in his eyes as he spoke about how happy he was to see his family together. We always knew there would be loving hugs from Baba, my grandmother, and Gigi whenever we visited their home in Don Mills. "We're going to Baba and Gigi's" was always a phrase that always brought excitement to my ears. As a kid, this meant relaxing on the comfiest couch, eating amazing home-cooked food, and coming home with Japanese snacks in each hand. It's a nostalgia like none other. These visits are associated with happy times, holiday celebrations, and iPad Monopoly games with the cousins. It's an aching nostalgia, one that currently hurts, but makes me feel lucky to have had. Baba and Gigi visits always ended with them walking outside at the end of the driveway, waving goodbye until they could no longer see us. This is one of the many Japanese customs they taught me throughout the years. Gigi was more the quiet of the two, always observant and always patient. He had a natural ability to explain concepts, and as a curious kid, it was noticeable talent. I remember coming home from a 3D movie when I was 9 years old with my newly acquired 3D glasses. You know, the glasses, the one you're supposed to recycle on the way out of the theater. Well, I didn't recycle them. I took them home, put them on, and looked in the mirror. To my shock, when I closed one eye and looked in the mirror, one of them was completely dark, and the other one was completely clear. I picked up the phone, I called Gigi, and he took his time on the phone to explain what was going on. I knew going to Harvard and writing a whole textbook was supposed to be impressive, but this personal experience, now this really hit it home for me. This guy knows his stuff. Even though our discussion was over 10 years ago, it came in handy that this past semester, I took a class focused on wave propagation and light optics, and the phenomena of polarization came up. I turned to my friend who I was studying with and told her, "Wow, my grandfather explained this to me when I was younger, and it's all coming back." The achy nostalgia came back again. Gigi also had wit. Once my brother Ben and we were walking around Don Mills neighborhood with him. We passed under a bridge that had walls filled with graffiti, top to bottom, colors of all sorts, probably a couple of slurs and other nasty gang stuff sprayed on its concrete walls. Gigi waved his hand at all this and went, "See this? I did this last weekend." You like it? Another time, while we were in the hospital, the nurse came in and asked, "Keigo, how many eyes do you have?" She was checking to see how alert he was. To her surprise, he said, "3. 3." She replied with a puzzled look. He then responded, "Yes, 2 eyes on my face and 1 eye in my name, Keigo." Gigi was not only funny, he was also gentle and patient. I thank him for his warm energy and calm comfort he showed us at every family gathering. I'm forever grateful to have grown up with many cousins, aunts, and uncles, and loving grandparents. He was so smart, yes, yet extremely humble. He had such an impact on my understanding of things and set our standards of intelligence very early on. I would also like to thank my mom and my aunts for organizing this service and their dedication to both Gigi and Baba these past few years. It is absolutely no easy feat taking care of a sick loved one. Your love and dedication as a parent and your selflessness is something I will always remember and look up to. Finally, thank you, Gigi, for your love and all the memories you leave with our families, the fun times you created, and all the teachings that will be remembered forever.
Is Professor Zaki here? Then if I can bring up Mary to say a few words.
Hi, I'd like to thank the family for the privilege of speaking here today. My name is Mary Jean Giliberto. To the family, I was simply known as Mary. I first met Keigo in 1978. I had signed up for one of his courses in engineering optics. There were 4 students taking his course that year. I remember walking into the classroom and we all looked at each other thinking, we must have the wrong classroom, because 3 of us, that is 75% of the class, were women. That was highly unusual for the day. I often wonder if that was the University of Toronto's first engineering course where the majority of students were female. When Professor Iizuka entered the classroom, he surveyed us students, and he told us that in his home life, he had the good fortune to be surrounded by women, including a wife and 4 daughters, and I think he even said the family pet at the time was also female. So he smiled and he remarked that his good fortune had followed him into the classroom that year. I enjoyed his course and I learned a great deal. After I completed the course, he complimented me on the reports I had written for my course assignments, and he asked if I would be interested in working with him in an editorial capacity on the textbooks he was planning to write. That was the beginning of a relationship that lasted for decades, encompassing several textbooks and papers. In my family, we always referred to Keigo as the professor. He was not a professor, he was the professor. In so many ways, he embodied all that the word professor means. First of all, he was brilliant. He was one of the most brilliant people I have ever known, but he never let this go to his head. He had a knack for expressing very complex concepts in simple terms. He certainly had a lot of original ideas. One intriguing example was to use a piece of clear cellophane, you know, the type that you use to wrap up gift baskets, to convert a laptop into a 3D display. Who thinks of these things? He had many other original ideas and was able to put these ideas to practical use. He was a great teacher and mentor. This was evident in his classroom, in the graduate students that he supervised, and in the textbooks that he wrote. His textbooks were highly acclaimed. Generations of optical engineers and scientists benefited from his textbooks. One reviewer on Amazon wrote, "No doubt the book was an eye-opener for me. Suddenly, all the dreary mathematics and abstract concepts became lively and meaningful." Quoting Professor Iizuka's own words, "Optics is light work. I found this book filled with humorous cartoons and illustrations certainly brought out the light in optics." He was a visionary. When giving advice to students, he would advise them to take 2 majors if they could manage it, or a major and a minor, because in the future there will be a great need for people who can bridge the gap between different fields of expertise. When you are an expert in 2 fields, it not only doubles your chance for success, but it uniquely qualifies you in matters where the 2 fields intersect. In today's world, we have a tendency to build information silos, isolated areas of expertise that don't communicate with one another. Real progress does not consist in building taller, narrower, and more insular information silos, but in bridging the gaps and exploring how different areas of expertise can interact with one another to their mutual benefit. The professor was a firm believer in collaboration. For example, he collaborated with colleagues in the medical field to build a 3D laparoscope and other medical instruments. The professor was kind, caring, compassionate, and respectful. He was generally concerned about me and my family, and I would receive emails from time to time like this one. "A summer greeting to you. I hope you and your family are in good health. I often wonder how you and your family are doing." On his Christmas newsletters, he always included a handwritten personal note of gratitude. In the early years of our working relationship, we often had marathon discussions around the coffee table in his home about the material for his textbooks. These discussions usually went on well into the night. Afterwards, he always insisted on walking me to my car, even though my car was parked on the street directly in front of the house. He wanted to make sure that I got to the car safely. I kept telling him he didn't need to do this because he could easily see me from the doorway, but he insisted. He would put on his outdoor shoes and walk me the 50 feet to my car, where he waited until I drove away before going back into his house. My life is all the richer for knowing the professor. He touched countless lives in so many ways. He lives on in the memories and lives of his family, whom he loved so very much. I struggled with a way to end this tribute, as this is not the end of his story. His legacy will live on through his work and family for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. I'd like to invite Doug up.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for coming up today. I'm just going to give you a little warning. I am going to cry. I am a sloppy crier, but I'm not embarrassed. I'm struggling, and you're going to see that. As I said, my name is Doug, and I'm Keigo's son-in-law. I married Yumi, his youngest daughter, and my personal favorite. And I feel honored to be able to speak about Keigo here today, but also heartbroken to have to do it. Seems like only yesterday we were in this very same building, saying goodbye to Yoko. I've been in the arts my whole life, and I've had the opportunity to meet many talented, successful people, creative people, but I don't think anyone has impressed me quite as much in the same way as Keigo. And it's not just in what he accomplished, it's in how he accomplished it. He was passionate and committed. He Wasn't flashy, and he wasn't pretentious. He just put his head down and quietly did great things. What I want to do today is tell you about the first time he blew my mind. It was on our first meeting, and I'd known him for maybe 10 minutes. When I first started dating Mayumi, she had told me about her father, the work he had done, and I couldn't help but be impressed. The size and scope of some of the projects he did, the textbooks, the inventions. This man sounded amazing, and I have to admit, I was intimidated to have to meet him. I barely made it out of high school. But before I met the man, I met his work. I came over to the family house with Ayumi one day, and the dining was a coffee table, which he often used as a workspace, was littered with just paper scraps, Scotch tape, Tim Hortons mugs, glue sticks, stuff that you would normally find on a grade school craft table. Not a place where you would expect, somebody to be doing science. But it didn't look remotely scientific. But I thought, okay, this guy's playing some cut and paste. But this is where the scientist was doing his experiments. I thought to myself, maybe I don't have to be so intimidated. A few minutes later, he came down from his office, and I met him for the very first time. And we talked about some of the stuff on the table, and he told me to pick up the Tim Hortons cup. And I just want to describe this Tim Hortons cup to you. It was like a small Tim Hortons cup that you see every day, and on top of it, he had just put a couple of semicircles that blocked most of the top of the cup, with just a rectangular slit down the middle. So when you looked down into the cup, all you could see was the bottom of the cup. Hidden behind the paper were two red circles, two red little dots. But they were obscured by the two pieces of paper he had picked up. And I thought, this is impressive. And then he told me to look inside. And so I held it up and I started to look at it. And he told me to relax my eyes. And eventually my right eye looked at one dot and my left eye looked at another dot. And these two dots became one, floating in the middle of the cup in perfect 3 dimensions. It was just amazing. It blew my mind. It was floating in air in perfect 3D. I couldn't hide my amazement, which seemed to delight him. It was the most elegant magic trick I had ever seen, except it wasn't magic at all. It was just knowledge. And he used some of the most analog materials in the world to create that beautiful trick. I tried to make one of those cups for today to bring to you guys so that you could experience the same thing that I did, but I failed miserably. Obviously, it takes more than being able to use a glue stick and scissors to perform that. Maybe there's some math involved. I don't know. Anyway, but I think about that day often. And to me, it was the perfect way to meet him, because it kind of summed him up for me, A little messy, a little rough around the edges, but brilliant to the bone. I had the opportunity to spend a few weeks with him after Yoko passed, and spent many nights talking to him about the work from different periods of his career. I loved the way his eyes would light up when he would talk about his work. You could see he was still passionate. He even, when talking about projects that were decades old, I could still hear the excitement in his voice. And it wasn't to brag. He didn't do that. He truly loved the work. And while there was some joy in reliving some of those moments, I think he was getting the most joy of being able to teach me the science behind it. His humility and his passion for his work are two traits that he possessed that I respect immensely. But more than that, he believed in himself. And I got the feeling that he believed there is no problem too difficult that he couldn't solve, and that he himself could solve that. And the practical lesson I take from that is this: if you apply yourself, you can accomplish anything. But you have to commit, like he committed. And that's what I use today as inspiration. So I hope you'll indulge me for a minute, because sometimes only an Irish folk song can be suitable. Fare thee well, love. Fare thee well, love. Far away you must go. Take my hand, love. Take my hand, love. Will we never meet again no more? Far away, love. Far away, love. Past the mountains and country wide. Hold my hand, love. Take my heart, love. Oh, you'll never know the tears I cried. But I drink to you, love, and I sing to you, my love, in pauper's glory, my time I'll bide. No home or ties dear, a restless rover, if I can't have you by my side. Fare thee well, love. Fare thee well, love. Far away you must go. Take my hand, love. Take my heart, love. Will we never meet again no more? Until we meet again once more.
Thank you, Deb. I'd like to invite anyone else up to say some words if anyone had something that they wanted to share about my dad. That would be a great time. And please.
Is that what Zachary is doing?
Oh, okay. Great, yes. Thank you. Is Professor Kunter here as well? Hi.
Just a few remarks about a wonderful person that we have all known. When I hear Keigo's name, when I think of him, the image that always comes to mind is that of a smiling and happy face. Someone with a wonderful sense of humor. His presence on any occasion is always something that brightens the conversation. He certainly was a highly accomplished researcher and a much liked teacher. particularly, he worked hard and valued his graduate students and supported them. Quite often he would involve them directly in his own research and his own work. He was very much an experimentalist, and that meant that a lot of the things he did ended up valuable contributions to society, to industry. You may have already heard about the much cited work he did for measuring ice thickness in the north. This was something that he developed, a technique, using ice thickness was normally measured by drilling holes, something that's very expensive and takes time. So he developed a technique using methods from radar distance measurement, but using microwave frequencies, because microwave frequencies can travel through ice. And that was very successful and ended up saving the Canadian government quite a bit of money and time. That's the kind of work he did. Keigo was a kind man, very kind man. And I think he has passed that kindness to his daughters. You probably already know about the wonderful story that when they were little girls, they saved that injured small bird and nurtured it to health, and then kept it as a pet for a few years. They even wrote a book about it. What I didn't know and learned recently, I was very happy to learn, is that book ended up being used as a grade 3 reader for many years across Canada. Wonderful. Keigo was also very proud of his Japanese heritage. He, as part of his work, his research often took him to Kyoto University, where he did some of the experimental work. And he would take his graduate students with him, for partly as a learning opportunity, partly to do their own research in a wonderful environment. And that resulted in a wonderful event that I will remember for many, many years. I happened to mention to him one day that I'm going to Kyoto for a conference. His eyes brightened up and he said, when? And when I told him the time, he said, I'll be there at the same time. We have to get together. Okay, sure. And he said, I'll take you to a restaurant to see the traditional and authentic traditional restaurant with an authentic traditional dinner. I said, sounds wonderful. So we met, and he brought his graduate student along, took us to this beautiful ancient house by the river, and we sat in a large room that had only a small table in the middle. Of course, we sat on the floor around the table as the Japanese tradition. And for a while, there was a flow of seed delicacies, tiny things, every one of them served in a small cup. That must have lasted for an hour or so, or even more. Anyway, it was a wonderful and unforgettable experience and unforgettable evening. So, this is the kind of man he was, and he will be missed, very much missed, and will very much remembered, never forgotten. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Lee.
Hi. Professor Iizuka was my teacher and later on my colleague at the University of Toronto. So I'd like to say a few words about him and about my experience as a student under him. So back in 1993, that was my last year as an undergrad student, I took his course, Optical Communications. And unlike Mary's experience, this time was with 80 students, not 4. So he must have gone very popular after a few years. So the first 2 weeks of lectures were really exhilarating, eye-opening. You know, played videos of the latest development of optical communication, of fiber communication, had demos. So we were, as students, all very excited. And then 2 weeks later, the add deadline has passed, so you can no longer add the course. And then he came in the classroom. The third week, first lecture, came in the classroom, and without any, demo, any gadgets, he started picking up a chalk and started writing on the board. Just, he started explaining, and then by the end of that lecture, the boards were filled with long equations, and we were like, "Oh my God, this is what this course is about." But I think the message there is, optics can be fun, but if you really want to study it, he sent the message that you have to be rigorous, and you have to know how to use your mathematical tools as well. So that was really an experience. But still, for that course, throughout that term, even though he kept writing equations on the board, but he did pepper his lectures, as always, with lots of jokes. And sometimes he would draw cartoons. He's a very good cartoonist. I don't know if he illustrated all of his textbooks, but he also drew cartoons on the board. And one particular thing I remembered was he drew a caterpillar, and he used the caterpillar to explain this is how waves propagate in space, right? Just the caterpillar going up and down like this, like a wave, which is a very apt analogy, I thought. So in his own words, optics is light work, and if he hadn't lightened our course work, he certainly had lightened our hearts. Professor Iizuka was also an amazing writer, and I recall picking up his engineering optics textbook from the library. Now, this is not one of our textbooks. And at that time, I was an undergrad student, and undergrad engineering students, they don't read others' textbooks, right? They hardly read their assigned textbooks. So I was like that, but because it's written by a professor I knew, I was intrigued. So I started reading it. And then I couldn't put it down because it's really interesting. And it was, almost like reading a novel. And he had, the first chapter was a brief history of optics. And it was very interesting to see how things develop. And he also had these anecdotes. So, for example, he had an anecdote about Charlestown and Nicholas Bloomberg. And those are the two Nobel laureates, by the way. But before they received the Nobel Prize, they were invited to a ceremony and they were awarded some other prize for their work in masers, which led to the invention of lasers. So they had their wives with them in the ceremony, and Charlestown's wife received a medallion made with ruby crystal. That's because Charlestown's maser used ruby, and you probably know later on there's the ruby laser. So Nicholas Bloomberg's wife looked at it, and she was just saying, "Wow, that's very nice," and she was saying to her husband, "Well, I wish I could have a memento like that to remind me of your laser." And Bloomberg said, "Oh, my dear, my laser works with cyanide." So that was one of the stories in his textbook. And you know why I really like to read it? Because it's full of these human side of stories. There are other stories, of course. I really would like to thank him for giving us an experimental optics course as a grad course. So so he gave many. So having an experimental component is necessary for his courses because optics is such an experimental science. So that goes for the fourth year optical communication course as well, and that came with four labs, which even though I did it 30 years ago, I still remember every one of these 4 labs. So that was very impressive. And those days, optics is always very expensive, and I hope my department chair is here. I'm going to say that's the reason we ask for a lot of grant. And making undergraduate lab courses, that also means very expensive, right? And there's very little funding for undergraduate labs. But Professor Iizuka really used his ingenuity, and he designed 4 different labs so students can rotate, so he can save, instead of having parallel labs, students all do the same thing, he had the students rotate to these 4 labs. Also, one of the labs involving laser diode, and those days laser diodes are very expensive, and they're very fragile too. If you put a little bit more current through the diode and you burn a diode, and then you cannot use, and you have to spend a lot of money to replace it. And undergraduate engineering students, they are not very careful. So in the lab manual, instead of writing, in big bold words, "Be careful," he actually drew a cartoon of a burning $500 bill. And I remembered it, and it made such an impression that everybody, looked at that burning $500 bill, and they were being extra careful. And that diode survived 80 undergraduate engineering students for the full term. It survived. Anyway, there are so many stories I wish I could share with you. Another story is it's a grad course, a graduate experimental course. It was nothing like anything that I've taken in undergrad or grad. We were entirely immersed in his lab environment. We were not given any instruction manual. We were asked to, demonstrate a certain effect and do a certain thing, and basically learning how to do experiment by really doing it with him. How to do alignment, how to develop photographs. Actually, in those days there's still the developer fluid and the fixed fluid and all that. We learn all that with him as apprentices, and I think that's the only way really to learn the skill and to master this science. And it's very difficult to have a course like this, to offer a course like this, because it uses an enormous amount of resource and a lot of time. I remember the four grad students with Professor Iizuka. We would start at 6 p.m. and it could even go past midnight, just continuously. And we just had so much fun. We didn't even realize time, just flew by and hours later. And that's how I learned. I was very fortunate to learn from him. And he's being very selfless to offer a course, to put in so much time, much more than just a run-of-the-mill grad course where you just show your previous slides, which you've done years ago, right? But this, to really make this kind of experimental course work, it's a lot of work, and he didn't really get any compensation, any additional teaching credit or compensation or anything. He did it out of his own good heart. And it wasn't even his own grad students that he did. I mean, he was transmitting that knowledge to somebody else's grad students, right? He's incredibly selfless. I just want to say that really Professor Iizuka's passing is a great loss to the department, but I think his knowledge, his skills, his strengths, optimism, and his sense of humor will forever stay with me, and I'm sure that will be with all those who have benefited from his teaching and his mentoring.
I'm going to invite Doug up to speak on behalf of my cousin who wanted to be here today.
Hello again. This is from John Nishimoto, Keigo's nephew. Nana, Izu, Megu, Ayu, Yoko, and Uncle Keigo. First, I am sorry that I could not be here in person, but I didn't want to be outnumbered 7-1 or 7-5, depending on your math. In my absence, there are a few memories that I want to share. For whatever reason, when I was probably 5 years old or so, I was under the impression that your dad owned and flew a helicopter. I remember our conversation when I asked him if he could take me for a ride. After a discussion about elementary school aerodynamics, he gently let me know that I was mistaken and he didn't own a helicopter. To this day, I kick myself for not asking him about a jet. When I was working my first real job as an engineer at a medical equipment manufacturer, I had to do some work in Mississauga. After I was finished, I went to U of T and found Uncle Keigo working in his office. Even though he was deep into his work, he dropped everything to let me intrude and visit. He showed me things he was working on, which included a way to test his concept of using the time delay of a reflected signal to measure the distance to a break in a subsea fiber optic cable. He laughed when I told him my passionate interest stopped at 20 kilohertz. And he says, Megu, maybe you can figure that one out? I was able to show him the equipment from my company, the Fisher Scientific Catalog, that he had on his bookshelf. With a mutual understanding of our weird places in the world, he took me on a journey through the bowels of the University to a really nice faculty-only lounge where we shared some Labatt's Blue and more geeky conversation. My third memory is not a memory because this is happening in present day. In my line of work, we build giant networks to support all the internet and now AI companies that you are all well aware of. These networks are built on millions of miles of millions of fiber miles of optic cable, and we use time delay concepts to locate fiber cuts. This information, overlaid with data including Google Earth KMZs, to precisely geolocate the exact location of the problem. And after 40 years, Uncle Keigo's experiments are still essential and relevant. With that, Amy, Thomas, Curtis, and I send our deepest love and condolences to the Iizuka family.
Thank you. Did anybody else want to speak? Come on up,
Hello, my name is Kenji, and I am the youngest of his nephews. I have not written anything down, and I'm saying everything by heart since I was not yet prepared to say what I am about to say. Keigo, or Gigi for all his nephews, was a great-grandfather, and I remember him always telling me about scientific stuff that I never really got, and I'd just stand there and take it. He would be teaching me about like photons or something. I'd just be standing there with only dinosaurs running through my brain. So I would just, when I was at home, I would always mix soap and like whatever I could find around the house and pour it in the toilet so I could make some sort of science trick or something, and then my mother would always tell me, "Oh, hey, that soap cleans your hands, you know, wow." Well, Gigi would explain it to you, so how about we go call him right now? I was always too embarrassed and too shy to ever call him, and I realized that was a little bit of a mistake. I remember whenever we went to his house, we would always sit and wait for the others to arrive. Once everyone's arriving, or whatever, I wish Gigi could have told me all the past time. We would all wait, and once everyone got there, we would all get in line, get our plates, and fill our plates with foods. Assorted meals like salads, sweet tofu, my favorite, and usually shrimp and fish. They would always urge me to eat more than I have on my plate, and I never did. I'm very scrawny because of it. I'm glad to have had him as a part of my life. He has opened my eyes to prosperous ways of living, and probably taught me like 90% about photons. Thank you.
Would anybody else like to speak? Is that Professor Kunder? Come on up. Perfect timing.
Thank you very much. So I wanted to thank you for the opportunity to speak today. For those of you who may not know me, my name is Professor Deepa Kunder, and I'm the chair of the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering, or ECE as we call it, at the University of Toronto. I'm honored to speak about our dear friend and colleague, Professor Keigo Iizuka. Professor Iizuka has been a valued member of our ECE community since 1968. Originally from Kobe, Japan, he completed his PhD in applied physics at Harvard University in 1961 on a Fulbright scholarship after graduating from Kyoto University, where he held a prestigious scholarship. He then served at Harvard as a research fellow and later as a lecturer before joining us at ECE. At the University of Toronto, Professor Iizuka made a name for himself through research across a broad spectrum of areas, from antennas and microwave holography to optical measurement, sensor technology, fiber optics, and 3D displays. He authored a number of impactful publications, including 3 significant books on photonics and engineering optics. He was also a principal investigator at the Ontario Laser and Lightweight Research Centre. In the years approaching his retirement, he dedicated himself to several significant projects, including the invention of the OmniFocus video camera. This groundbreaking innovation addressed a fundamental challenge that has persisted since the dawn of photography, achieving equal focus for elements in both the background and the foreground of an image. The OmniFocus video camera integrates an array of color video cameras, each set to a different focal distance, along with a unique distance mapping camera that provides real-time distance information for every pixel in a scene. A sophisticated pixel selection utility leverages this distance data to choose the best focus pixels from the various video outputs, resulting in a final video display where both the foreground and the background items are in perfect focus. For this and other work, Keigo received a number of awards and accolades, including the Fujio Frontier Award, the ATR Excellence Research Award, and he was made Fellow of the Optical Society of America. In recent days, Keigo's colleagues in ECE have been reflecting on his career and impact. I wanted to share a few thoughts and memories from them with you all here today. Former chair of ECE, Professor Safwat Saki, remembers Keigo as a wonderful and much admired and loved colleague, and as someone who valued his graduate students highly and supported them generously. Professor Micah Stickle was a former student of Keigo's and recalls his fond memories of his professor as a student in the mid-90s. He reflects, Professor Iizuka's Fundamentals of Optics course was a wonderful experience, as he exuded an effortless enthusiasm for the topic, which was founded on a deep understanding of the area. He further adds, I recently came across his photocopied textbook and was reminded of his joyful and childlike nature, as throughout his textbook he had included his own hand-drawn cartoons to enliven and explain the material. I greatly appreciate his example of maintaining such enthusiasm and curiosity throughout one's career. Another former student, Kevin Chen, now a professor at the University of Pittsburgh, recalls, my time at U of T was greatly influenced by Professor Iizuka in a very positive way. I learned a lot of optics from him, but more importantly, I learned a positive attitude and a sense of appreciation toward people around me. Professor Komen Pang, who is here today, also has fond memories of Keigo from his days as a graduate student, but not from his courses, but rather, he says, the Friday nights when the Ballroom Dance Club would take over the dance studio in the Benson building, and where Keigo, my wife, and I were regulars. It's fun as a student to see one of your professors in a social setting. Professor Leon Garcia remembers Keigo and says, as always cheerful and busy, the 4th floor in the Sanford Fleming building was a hub of activity around his labs. He was very hands-on. I remember him in coveralls when he was running experiments on underground radar in the courtyard of the Galbraith building. He goes on to say he was also devoted to his daughters. He wrote with them a children's book on a blackbird kuro and gave a copy to my kids. He was a gentle spirit. Professor Peter Herman recalled Keigo's warm welcome when Peter joined ECE in the late 80s and was struck by Keigo's down-to-earth personality and sharp sense of humor. These qualities endeared him to thousands of students over the decades. He was popular with students, and his optical communication course was always oversubscribed. Professor George Eleftherides shared the following. Keigo was such a nice person and a gentleman. His engineering optics book is full of insight and practical wisdom, a treasure to have. He will be missed. In recent weeks and months, some ECE professors visited Keigo in the hospital. Professors Komen Pang and Li Chen were able to spend some valuable time with him and report back to us on their visits. Thank you, Komen and Li. I'd also like to acknowledge Keigo's family, who shared him with us for many decades and took such loving and gentle care of him in his final years. His daughters, Nozomi, Uzumi, Megumi, and Ayumi were certainly his proudest accomplishments. As young academics, we often are looking to make an impact by publishing papers, winning awards, and sharing conferences. But something Keigo taught us all is that the biggest impact you have is through how you treat others. His gentle mentorship of students, his kind friendship and collaboration with colleagues, and his inspiring way of seeing the world has positively impacted all who knew him. It is not lost on us, then, that Keigo's research involved bringing multiple things to focus. On behalf of the ECE department, I offer my sincere condolences to Professor Iizuka's family and friends and on this immense loss. Please know that his legacy will live on through his students, his research, and through all of us who were lucky enough to know him. Thank you.
Was there anyone else who'd like to speak? Pardon? Yes, go on. Anyone else? Go once. Come on, please, Mr. Mead.
My name is Tom Mint. I'm here today to pay my last respect of my Kyoto University Dai Senpai. In 19, Iizuka family and our friends know each other for over 50 years. And when the kids were small, we used to have gathering, Christmas, exchanging gifts, and many other activities together. And when the kids were grown up and left home, the adults were still forming a group, we still meet each other and having parties and so on for many decades. And I wondered that why we didn't have a chance of meeting Sensei in Japan. How come we happen to be in meeting each other in Toronto? I figured out there are two key connection factors. One is the Kyoto University connection. I entered Kyoto University in 1960 as a foreign student under the Japanese scholarship for 6 years. That's about 64 years ago. At that time, Sensei must have already left Kyoto University, graduated, and already in the US, Harvard, maybe in his final years of PhD and so on. Since both of us are graduates from Kyoto University, and he graduated many years before me, he is my great, we call it Dai Senpai. a great senpai. And according to the traditions and custom of Kyoto University, we have great respect for the senpai. And when we moved to Don Mills, the Iizuka family and a few Japanese family and also some mixed marriage are already there. And the group called Don Mills Village. Because why? Because over 50 some years ago, Leslie Street was a country, just a road, a small road, a tiny road, just like a country road with open ditches on both sides. Of course, now you will see that it's a 5-lane with boulevards and sidewalk. It's completely different. Also at that time, you feel that on the west side of Leslie, on the York Mills Road, north and south side of York Mills Road, there were 2 big blocks of open field, green pastures owned by the late billionaires, E.B. Taylors, used as a horse farm. So all our group of Don Mills refer as a village. And since it's the leader of this group, we always refer him as the Sonjo, is the Don Mills village head. Yeah. And when the kids all grown up and all the adults, actually I refer to the group. Actually, it's the first group is the Don Mills Japanese and mixed Japanese group, and the other group later, formed many years later, was the graduates of Kyoto University, the old boys of Kyoto University and Tokyo University joined together. We call the Rakyukai. We also meet quite often, bringing food and meet in each other's home, but mostly in Sensei's home. We used to bring food, drinks, together, eat, drinks, and have endless of conversations. One thing notice is at the end of near the end of all this gathering, Sensei will propose a dance. You never know that Sensei is such a good dancer. He knows all the steps of of course, waltz, tango, and so on. He knows all the steps of all the classic dances. And another unforgettable image of the Sensei is whenever the gathering happened to be in Sensei's home, when we go there, he will welcome you at the door. You don't expect that. With his very impressive, custom-made, made in Japan, custom-made suits, black suits with bow ties. So we have to remember whenever we have gathering in his house, we try to show up with our best dress possible. lastly, I want to say is that of all those years in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, and with many of the gatherings we had together, and with Sensei's guidance, and with his open and warm-hearted welcome to all the guests, all the members. Everybody was feeling so comfortable and to enjoy and can enjoy all fully the funs and joys of those events and activities. And these happy events and memory, I think, will embed it in our heart forever, even now. For that, all members of our group, I think, Sensei deserve our greatest respect and thanks. From now on, I think we'll miss him a lot. Sensei, 今まで長い間いろいろ大変お世話になりました。心から感謝してます。ありがとうございました。
Thank you. Was there anyone else who wanted to speak? Okay. Well, it's been wonderful to hear so many stories about my dad from a very scientific perspective. We knew he was smart. We didn't realize he was that smart, but he would always tell us that, unfortunately, you girls, your brains were contaminated by your mother's side, so you're not going to be as smart as me. So he was always trying to make us laugh. He was so joyful around the house. You know, my dad once said to me, whenever you want to do something, you better do it. Life is fast. The sooner you realize it, the better your life will be. He made us believe that anything in life is possible. Just do it. There's a solution to every problem. He lived to be 92, and it felt like the blink of an eye, and I'm sure he would say it felt even faster for him. And I wish I could enjoy another 92 years with him. While physically, his body had been through more than most humans should ever handle. He had cancer in his bones, major organs, a broken arm, which is what initially landed him in the hospital, heart and kidney failure, type 2 diabetes, C. difficile, pneumonia, delirium, listeria, and shingles, and that's just in the last 6 months. And any one of those things would discourage most 92-year-olds, but not my dad. He was a fighter. He was focused on getting well. Gratefully, his mind was still sharp when you engaged with him in any meaningful discussions. He saw his physical struggles as just one more problem to be solved. He was kind, creative, humble, athletic. I gave him a pickleball paddle and ball at the age of 90, and in the backyard, I set up some targets and he managed to hit them. Like, it was no problem. Like, he had been doing this his whole life. Now I understood why I'm such a good pickleball player. I always thought it was from my mom's side. And over the last few weeks, I've just struggled to figure out which stories to share with you. There's countless of stories to showcase all of these traits that he exuded in every one of his actions. As it's been said, my dad loved to ballroom dance. So when we were little, he would come home late from work well after we'd been put to bed, and he would gently wake us up one at a time. There's 4 of us, carry us each to the bathroom to prevent us from having any accidents during the night. And after he'd take us to the bathroom, he'd again carry us in his arms and ballroom dance with us each for a little bit and then put us back to bed. And he did that with each of us, one by one. And I could hear my sisters complaining about being woken up, but I never heard them complain about the dancing, so I was always looking forward to being the last one since I was the youngest. And I think by that point his arms were probably tired, so he went from heaviest to lightest. My dad's father was an artist and taught painting, and many of his paintings hang in a gallery in Japan. And my dad wanted to nurture the artistic side in us as well, so he'd hold a weekly drawing contest. He would select an item from the house, place it on the table, and we'd all sit around trying to draw it. Once we're all completed our artwork, one by one, he would hold each one up and compare it to the item. Take his time with each one, making everyone feel so proud of their work. And he was always able to find something positive to say about each person's work, whether it was the shading technique, the attention to detail, the colors used, or the effort exerted. I was probably only 3 years old when these drawing contests started, which meant I was competing with my older sisters, the oldest being 5 years older than me. So imagine a 3-year-old barely able to hold a crayon competing with an 8-year-old. And yet somehow, every 4 weeks, I managed to win that contest. This gave me confidence and encouraged me to always try, no matter how the odds are stacked against me. In the 90s, I interviewed all of my family members, and I was going over some of the questions that I had asked my dad after he died, and it said, a lot of his responses to my questions were joke answers, because that's how he was. So I asked him what his favorite TV show was. He said Jerry Springer. His favorite place was the bathroom. I said, do you have any phobias? He said, women and digital rectal exams. If you could have one wish, what would it be? To have a son. He was always looking for ways to make me laugh. Although maybe that last answer is probably more true than jest. But when I asked him what his biggest fear was, he said it was death. A few weeks ago, we were sitting together on the hospital bed. He just had this terrible delirium episode where he was confused and scared. Now, most patients don't have recollections of their episodes and aren't aware of what's happening, but not my dad. His brain was still sharp enough to make him aware. So he asked me afterwards, he said, how come I wasn't able to help him? And I told him I didn't know he was aware that it was even going on. And so I kept asking, how can I help you? What do you need? And he'd say, everything. So I just assumed that it would pass and he didn't know what would happen. But after the episode passed, we sat touching head to head, holding hands. He asked me if I was scared, and I said yes. And I asked him back, and he said yes. Then he asked me if I was sad, and I said yes. Then he asked me if I wanted to cry, and I said yes. So we sat, touching heads, holding hands, and softly crying. And after a moment, I whispered, I love you. And he whispered back, thank you. I miss my dad so much, but I'm so comforted by seeing his influence and traits passed down in the behaviors of my sisters and their children. In Kenji, as you all witnessed, we see how he can easily work a room and be the life of a party. In Norika, I see his kindness and love for animals. In Kiyomi, I see his patience and wisdom beyond her years. In Ben, I see his great intelligence and humility. In Mia, I see his playful spirit and joy for life. In Jaden, I see his devotion and all-around great guy attitude about everything. In Nana, I see his creativity and generosity. In Izumi, I see his tenacity and fearlessness. And in Magwell, I see pretty much everything. I put together a video that highlights some of my family's life with him. In it, you'll see how much he loved to be silly, have fun, and be with family. There's a dancing sequence in the middle where we're doing the tango. He steps on a needle and then very dramatically falls down in an incredibly delayed fashion. I think I know now where I get my acting chops from. You'll also get to see him with his favorite daughter, yes, our pet starling, to whom he dedicated one of his textbooks. The dedication is written on the front of today's program. They had a very special bond. Even though she could fly, she chose to mostly hang around on her shoulders and only use her wings to fly from person to person. So I hope to capture his life well-lived, well-loved, and well-laughed. So Dad, we're all so sorry you had to face your biggest fear. And if you could respond, I'm sure you would have said, oh, you don't look sorry. Or more likely, not nearly as sorry as I am. So for now, it's time for you to finally rest. You really deserve it. Say hi to Mama and Kudo for us. We love you.
Some moments that I've had, some moments of pleasure. I think about us lying on a beach somewhere. I think about us diving off a rock into another moment. The case of George the Wine. Oh God, I can't stop laughing. This sense of humor of mine, it isn't funny at all. But we sit up all night talking about it. Just being alive can really hurt. These moments given are a gift from time. On a balcony in New York, it's just started to snow. He meets us at the lift, like Douglas Fairbanks, waving his walking stick. But he isn't well at all. The buildings of New York look just like mountains through the snow. Just being alive, it could really hurt. These moments given are a gift from time. Just let's try to give these moments back to those who will survive. And I can hear my mother saying, every old sock meets an old shoe. And that a great saying, every old sock meets an old shoe. Here come the hills of time. Heed their mooring. Hey there, brother, dancing down the aisle of a plane. Smurf playing his guitar refrain. Hey there, Teddy, spinning in the chair at every road. Hey there, Michael, do you really love あなた変わりはないですか。日ごと寒さが募ります。着てはもらえぬセーターを寒さこらえて編んでます。女汽車の音すすり泣くように聞こえます。お酒並べて